Mohan, Chief Strategist at the Robin Report and Associate Professor at FIT. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Robin Report and Fashion Institute of Technology's Thought Leadership Forum, Retail Transformation. Today, we're taking a deep dive into balancing and synchronizing the supply chain network. The last mile, is it really dependent on the first 10,000 miles? That will be our topic today. We're going to learn from a retail sourcing and supply chain leader, a business strategist consultant, and a retail software executive on why the phrase, "you're only as strong as your weakest link," has taken on a whole new meaning in today's chaotic supply chain ecosystem. I'm also joined by my colleague, Peter W. Chan, who's an associate professor and chairperson in production management at FIT. Peter, give us a wave. So Peter and I welcome our sourcing and supply chain experts. If you don't mind giving a wave when I introduce each of you, Ronnie Robinson is the interim head of sourcing and supply chain at Designer Brands Incorporated. Chirag Patel is president of Bamboo Rose. And Richard Von Hertzberg is merchandise process and systems consultant at Columbus Consulting. Well, it's certainly been a chaotic time for retailers, especially in terms of supply chain. Can each of you just talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll probably go first, and I'm sure Ronnie and Richard can add some good thoughts to this. So I think everybody would say it is chaotic. The key word is capacity, limited capacity across the board, whether it's labor, port congestion, container availability, production space availability in your factories abroad. So it's just a true chaos right now, just to trying to get to this last wave of this supply chain bullwhip effect. And I think what we're noticing as well, in the consumer industry is that consumers are now moving more towards pre-COVID categories of products they want to buy now. So there's this additional wave of new demand on these types of products, adding to and feeding this whole cycle as well. And Bamboo Rose, we have a global customer base. A lot of our customers are in Europe, in South Africa, Australia, Middle East, slightly perhaps some different variations of the chaos, but at the end of the day, the same supply chain chaos that we're seeing here in the US. It is pretty chaotic. And I think as the Robin Report blog mentioned today, you can't emphasize this on a daily basis enough.
Yeah, I've been doing this for almost 35 years, and I don't remember ever a time where it's been as chaotic as it is now. We've had our share of port strikes and a few other things that have gone on to disrupt the supply chain, but right now it's almost like a perfect storm. And you add COVID into the mix on top of all the other things. It's really been a challenging 18 months, and we're still in the middle of it. I do hope there's light at the end of the tunnel, end of next year, but it's extremely challenging throughout every aspect, from the factory side all the way through to getting goods into stores and even getting goods to consumers at home.
Yeah, I've worked with some of the biggest retailers in the industry, and some of this disruption is really not surprising, because you'd be surprised at how crude and in many cases absent their technology support is that manages the processes and the transactions in the supply chain. I think most retailers have purchase order management systems and EDI, but that's pretty much it. For the rest, all of this is managed via email with Excel attachments, all the plans and discussions and so forth. Very unstructured, very inconsistent. So it's really, to some extent, not surprising that we have this lack of control and lack of predictability around the supply chain at the moment.
Well, let's jump right into our first topic, which is streamlining the upstream processes to maintain agility to customer or consumer trends. So what are some of the key challenges that retailers face during upstream business processes, like early product innovation, supplier collaboration, product development, and how have those challenges either evolved or been exacerbated by the pandemic?
Well, I'll go first on this one. I think that if you really think about it, many retailers, and I can't speak for the whole industry, obviously, but many retailers have continued to do things the way they've always done it. And, you've got product development time, from initial concept all the way through to delivering goods. Some people are still at 9 to 12 months. And, if you think about what's gone on in the technology avenue in the last 10, 15 years, it's kind of strange that we're still doing it that way. Why do you have to get all these samples made? Why do you have to see everything pulled together at the same time? Why do we have to go to Milan and Paris and wherever else we go to the shop to get all the ideas of the stuff, when you've got everything these days at your fingertips, and the ability to, whether it's virtual sampling or whether it's utilizing your suppliers to do product development in a much faster way, because they have access to the same information that you do. Why there's so many still, I think in so many cases, there's so many retailers other than the pure digital native guys that are out there today, who are doing things in much the same way that they always have. And, and they think a win is to get 4 weeks out of the supply chain, when some of their competitors are doing things in 3 to 4 months that they're still taking 9 to 12. So to me, that's the big opportunity in this whole deal. And I think one of the things that COVID has shown us is you don't physically have to be somewhere to make decisions. You don't physically have to be with a person to have great product development and design. You can do things virtually, and you can use technology to speed things up and save a ton of money and cost. Think of all the money that's been saved by people not being on airplanes 5-6 times a year to Asia.
And the environment saved too, with reduction.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
If I could add to Ronnie's point of view, absolutely agree, Ronnie. I think, and you've been the first-time expert in this. Pre-COVID, there's a rhythm of meeting vendors in person, going to showrooms, physical sampling. There's this extensive timeline, linear progression to go through that whole ideation development cycle. And then COVID just hit all of a sudden. Everybody had to immediately be forced into a very digital world. And some were good at adopting to it, and some still are slightly struggling through it. So, it is sort of breaking away the leaders and winners that are using digital sampling or bringing virtual sessions with vendors very early in their ideation cycle to look at new ideas on the bring to market. A lot of consumer trends have changed during COVID. Preferences have changed. How do you quickly bring that new type of product ahead of your competitors? That's what we're seeing. We're also sort of seeing this, this forced experience that some of our traditional clients are going through, where they've reassessed all their legacy practices and processes, and it forced them to realize, why are we doing this? Let's get rid of the spreadsheet or these, 12 weeks of the, approvals that we have to go through. Let's get a lot more lean. And one of our clients, a leading department store retailer, actually said that it forced us to get ready for a marathon. We had to shed a lot of weight, get ready for a marathon, and now we're agile so that we can sort of navigate this type of a pandemic or other type of a disruption a lot more carefully. So fully agree with what you said.
Chirag, I love that getting ready for a marathon analogy. That's spot on. Richard, love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, to Ronnie's point, so much 20th century thinking still pervades the way that retailers plan and manage their business. My area of expertise is around planning. And so what I see in that practice is pretty much what I call a batch mentality. The way that retailers think about planning is to think about a season. And they sit down, and their planning cycle is built around a 3, in some cases, a 6-month season. They lay out their financial budgets for the season. They go through their assortment strategy. What are they going to carry over from last season? What are they going to introduce, in the coming season? And then they make their decisions, and they start fleshing out the detail of their assortment plans. And many of these retailers literally have a milestone in their planning calendar called line finalization or assortment finalization. So they literally finalize their decisions once every 6 months or once every 3 months, which in today's world just doesn't make sense. So really what you want to do is you want to structure your strategy for the period, but you don't want to finalize your decisions until the last moment when you have to finalize them. So that means that you can, and of course, when they finalize a decision, then they, to Ronnie's point, they then go to market. They go on a buying trip to to the Far East or to Milan or wherever. Of course, in this day and age, you can go to market in that sense every day if you want to, virtually, or once a month, or however often you want to make your decision. So the mentality around planning the business differently, changing the culture of the business to be far more agile, and actually changing the systems that support that kind of planning cycle. To me, that's what I call 21st century, but we're already 21 years into the 21st century and not much has moved.
Yeah, I think, just to follow on, I think in many ways I don't blame people because they've been successful for many years doing it that way, right? I mean, none of the senior executives have got to a certain position in their career, presumably by being good at what they've done, right? And so it does, this whole thing is about change management and getting people to think through how we do things differently and more quickly and faster. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck doing the things. You're going to have product in stores that nobody's going to want to buy, or product online that nobody's going to want to buy. And unless you are really willing to change, I think the last 10 years and certainly the last 2 have really shown that to be the case.
Yeah, I'd love for any of you to kind of talk about the bullwhip effect and what's been happening with that in terms of supply chain specifically this year.
So I mean, just to share a perspective that we've sort of evolved into, at Bamboo Rose, is that, traditionally bullwhip effect has been correlated to the supply chain. So if there's any early disruption in supply chain, you kind of see that amplitude all the way back. I mean, exactly where we started off with the chaos at the port congestion is because it sort of saw the supply chain impact early in the production cycle. But what we sort of realized, and again, what Ronnie and Richard were talking about, continuous planning versus seasonal planning, right? Time buckets being, not being, so long and finite, is extending that entire line of sight early in that innovation design cycle, so that the bullwhip is the entire value chain and not just supply chain. So any early visibility, management, control can minimize the impact at the end. But any delays up front, finalizing your line after 8 or 12 weeks of planning it, can have an impact where your product at the end of the day may not be consumer trend ready or things of that sort. So we're sort of seeing that connection of your innovation and design cycle with the supply chain cycle and becoming more of a connected value chain cycle, for lack of a better term, and having the line of sight of the bullwhip effect be, a lot more early in the process than where it is right now.
That's very provocative. Let me ask, how are retailers really managing through all these challenges? And can you share with us any best practices which are emerging, or how supplier and retailer relationships, are they shifting to be more responsive to customer expectations?
Well, I think that if you think about what's going on right now, anytime you waste in the beginning is just exacerbated, as Chirag just said. It's just exacerbated at the end of the process. And so to me, that I don't want to name companies, but the companies that are up there and doing really well are the ones that are able to produce product really, really fast. In some cases, I know of some companies that don't even produce product. It's all 3-dimensionally designed and developed, and what you see on the website is a 3D image of the item, not even a photograph of the item. It's not even been made yet. And those people are the ones who are getting reactions from their customers quickly, and then you can make a decision on the supply chain side. Well, do we want to get things? Do we want to put it on an airplane, although that's extremely expensive? Or do we want to put it on a boat or whatever? But at least you're ahead of the game by knowing that that's an item that somebody wants to buy, as opposed to let's go through this whole process as we've always done and hope by the time we get it here that they want to buy it. So to me, it's that initial of getting an idea translated into something that you can buy, and then deal with the rest of the stuff that's going on, because everybody in the world has to deal with that. The ships aren't going any faster for ZARA than they are for J. Crew or for anybody else. The airplanes are going at the same speed. It's the sewing machines go at the same speed. So it's not about the production element of it. It's about the planning and pre-production and getting things, making decisions on what we want to buy right away, and then we'll worry about the back end, and that's what I get paid to do.
One thing that this pandemic and all the disruption has made clear is that you can no longer simply treat the supply chain as a siloed cost center, which is another element of 20th century thinking, where the emphasis was on cost reduction, and that was the incentives for those in charge were based around that. Now, it's really a strategic, integrated component of the entire business that needs to be thought through from a completely different perspective.
Yeah, and Ronnie, I'm actually going to name names if that's okay with you.
Sure.
But I listened to Chip Bird yesterday on the earnings call for Levi, and one thing he mentioned is exactly what you said, and he talked about his global supply chain diversification strategy. So, all of you are so spot on regarding this topic today.
Well, and just to follow on from Rich's point, I've spent my whole life looking for 5 cents here or there in various parts of the process. And in the big scheme of things, it doesn't matter. What matters is you get a product into the stores or online that you sell at full price. That's the game. I mean, if you can avoid a markdown, then the 5 cents, 10 cents, 20 cents, $5, whatever goes away, because you're getting it all back at full price margin. And so, that, if anything, that's what taught it. I used to, talk to my supply chain guys who would try to save a nickel in the distribution center, but if that caused a delay of a week somewhere else, it wasn't worth it. But so you got to get yourself out of this. Yes, it's important to watch the pennies, but it's not at the expense of getting the product to the customer. That's the key.
So Ronnie and Richard, maybe more of a comment and a question, since, as practitioners and really, strategy consultants who firsthand give a lot of great advice. You mentioned earlier that, it's about building that supply chain network, a trusted network, but that's not just meaning I've identified a vendor and I'm going to do business, truly making a partnership, right? That, if I give you very early demand signals, much before a line finalization, and it's not a commitment, but I'm giving you a very early view of what I believe my market may look like. Can you assess what are your production capacity availability for that time period? Who are the mills or the component suppliers you work with? Get the supply chain service providers readied as well. So you kind of bounce that signal back and forth very early, so that if there are any large guardrails you want to work within, that I can only get 80 or 60% of what I need. With this raw feedback available, I can start looking at alternatives when I have to go to the commitment stage. So it's really, not a vendor, but a partner network, and technology, of course, we believe, slightly biased, enables that. But what are your points on that? Do you feel that it's an overused word, but truly is partnership?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that, to me, the fundamental, and we're going to talk about sustainability later, but the fundamental thing that I think is so important today is transparency and visibility into the supply chain. And in the old days, you used to go and just do business with a factory or even an agent, and then they did business with a factory. Now we've got to know who the fabric mill is, who the spinning mill is. Every single aspect of the supply chain we have to know and be understood, because the customers are demanding that. And we don't want to get goods stuck somewhere because the US government says you can't source from that place or whatever it might be. So to me, the partnership element is even more important, because you can't have too many vendors today. You've got to narrow down your vendor base so that you can be meaningfully strong with people. Mm-hmm. And you've got to be able to partner with them as an example, to say, look, we're seeing this happening here. We don't want to take a position on this, but we think this is what's going to be. So maybe making it up. You hold capacity for 100,000 pieces. I'll give you 50,000 for sure, but you make sure we got the upside covered. Plus, you go out and take a position on this raw material and that raw material, because we're not ready to pull the trigger yet, but we think this is what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, we're not going to leave you hanging dry out there and with a big liability. We'll figure out a way to make it happen. And those conversations, you can't have those conversations with 1,000 suppliers. You can have them with 20 or 30, depending on the size of your company, maybe 50 or 100. But so it's all about partnership and partnership. I used to laugh at when retailers used to have to ask for partnership. That meant they wanted something from the vendor, right? We expect partnership here. Well, now it's the other way around as well. They're calling me up and saying, hey, we've got some downtime in a couple of months. What can you do to help me? And I'm scrambling with my team to go figure out what we can do to help them. So it works both ways. But as I said, you can't do that with too many people because it just gets unmanageable. You can only do it with trusted partners, transparent partners, and partners that you really want to grow with in the future.
Yeah, it's all about risk management. It's about sharing the risk. You know, previously the expectation was that the supplier would take all the risk because they had a contract, a PO, and it was their problem. But going forward, it's about sharing, spreading the risk amongst the network of people involved, and that critically relies on, firstly, a change in mentality around this, the way in which you transact, but secondly, transparency and communication, the ability to share information, share demand signals, share production status, and so forth, in order for people to make the decisions that ultimately result in the risk being fairly shared across the network.
Richard, that's a really good point and a perfect segue into our second topic, which is shifting the supply chain from a cost center to a strategic differentiator. And so what's the importance of supply chain and business partner transparency? I know we kind of briefly talked about that, but let's take a deeper dive, but also in maintaining margins and market share during this turbulent, time for retailers.
Sorry, go ahead, Ronnie. I think you're.
No, go ahead, sure.
Just your perspective to share is that, and I'm seeing this in our customer base and industry in general. The chief supply chain officer is now moving into a more elevated role. They're not just a service center executive. They're really working with top line business growth, margin growth. So there is some pretty good movement and strategy that's been implemented. Just to give you a quick story, one of our clients during the pandemic, and kind of connecting the previous story, because they work with their vendors as partners and not just vendors, were able to share that risk, as Richard said, cull down the orders, shift the orders, and then when demand started surging, they were the first to get first dibs at production. So it was a mix of supply chain and sourcing executives that were able to make that a differentiator. They had record-breaking growth, brought both top line, revenue growth and margin growth. So it's really, looking at that perspective. We're at least also seeing from a supply chain side, and I'll let, of course, Richard and Ronnie talk a lot more about the last mile, which is where some of this is being seen. But even on the first 10,000 miles, there are different strategies being implemented. Instead of ordering in pre-packs, do you order in singles or eaches so that you can have speed of breaking, moving inventory to your 3PL processes, your stores that are maybe acting as your 4 distribution centers. So all these different types of ideas being implemented by supply chain executives on how you're buying and moving inventory across the supply chain so they can differentiate.
Yeah, I think one of the big changes you need to see is a very, very close collaboration between your chief merchant, your sourcing executive, and your supply chain officer. The collaborative nature of that, those three decision areas is critical in making the shift to a strategic positioning.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, I think about my own situation now, and I think I probably add more value in a business context than I do in a supply chain or a sourcing context, because I've got people who do that and they are very good at what they do. Now it's my job is to translate the business needs into opportunity. So an example would be, shifting production country to somewhere in Central South America, to make product that we would normally make elsewhere. And you might pay more from a first cost perspective. You may even pay more from a landed cost perspective, but it's only taking you to get it. It takes you 2.5 weeks to get it here, as opposed to 60 with 90, pick a day. None of us kind of know how long it's taking anymore. So you can only plan a certain amount. And so would you rather pay $1, making up, but $1 more for something and get it here 4 to 6 weeks earlier? The answer is always yes. Speed always trumps price, always. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, if you're making a commodity item, you need to pay the lowest possible cost for it. But if it's fashion, oh gosh, you got to get that stuff in and out really, really quick. All depends on the nature of your business.
Yeah, the traditional paradigms, I always say the guys in the warehouse don't give a damn about markdowns.
Right.
That's true. And I think what you were mentioning, Ronnie, is maybe an example of nearshore suppliers and production. And I'm just wondering if any of you have, examples of retailers that are either A, using supply chain as a strategic differentiator in their business, but also more examples of, how this nearshore production can really be beneficial, and are retailers actually doing this?
Well, the classic example all of us know about is ZARA, and what they've done in Europe and North Africa, and getting product made close to home as fast. But that was all pre-COVID, right? And so they were ahead of the game clearly. Those of us that weren't as far ahead as that have had to sort of react in different ways. But yeah, I think ultimately for me, it's the way I think about supply chain and sourcing now is you've got to have a very, very, very balanced portfolio. The days of having all of your product in China or all of your product in Vietnam or wherever are long gone. You cannot afford to take that risk anymore. You've got to diversify from a risk perspective, but certainly from a speed perspective. I've heard of some people coming back to the US to do it. I'm not sure we go that far. I mean, it's pretty expensive to make goods in the United States. But then you don't have to worry about your supply chain at all. So again, depending on your brand and your markup structure and your margin structure, that might make sense for you. But it's there's people out there chartering their own airplanes. There's people out there chartering their own shipping lines, believe it or not. I mean, so people are doing everything they can to ensure their product because even if you pay top dollar to get, doesn't mean that container is going to get on that ship. And unfortunately, we have no way of pushing back and getting any form of compensation for that. Maybe they'll give you a discount on the next container, but that's not going to, there's 50,000 pieces on that container. You just lost a lot of money by not being able to sell that. So, yeah, I think it's all about now looking at everything from a balanced portfolio perspective.
Yeah, if I could add to that, Ron, absolutely. Just also speaking to some of the customers, it is the next normal is going to be that far near sourcing balance. You're already seeing that in some sectors in retail. Furniture. Some of the furniture retailers are getting a lot more from Central America. Some of the conversations I've had with executives like yourselves is the MOQs are much higher in Central America, for instance, versus the experience base in China. But at the end of the day, there's a balance, like you said, between margin and lost sale, right? So if you don't have the speed, if you don't have the trend right products in the store, and you can't get it from your traditional sources abroad, you're risking that lost sale. So it's really gonna finding that risk, that the reward risk balance in your portfolio going forward is at least some of what we're seeing happening in certain sectors in retail.
Well, and you think about it, where in some cases we're paying almost $30,000 for a container from China.
Yeah.
If you're in the furniture business, I don't know the furniture business, but I don't think you get many sofas in a container personally, right? So,
exactly.
That's going to be an expensive hit to somebody's cost. So, if you're shipping 50,000 shoes or 50,000 t-shirts, again, it's still a high cost, but you can amortize it. But to Chirag's point, anybody who's in that type of business had better be doing things closer to home, purely from a cost of container perspective.
Richard, you want to jump in here and give us your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, well, the thing that occurs to me is that, all this disruption and is really geographic and to some extent political. We've also got climatic change layered on top of all this, and I think increasingly that's going to be another factor that we got to think about. And if we want to future-proof our businesses, we should be wide awake to that issue too.
That's a really good point. Wow. So this has been a really great conversation so far. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to turn over to Peter, who's going to do our question and answer.
Hi, how are you? Okay, thank you. What suggestion do you have for retailer to help them to make the transition and position their supply chain as a strategic differentiator? Say, what's easy, what's difficult? How would you prioritize the investment? Is this just a system challenge, or are there organizational and culture shift that need to be addressed? Thank you.
I'll start. I think somebody said it earlier about, to me, I think there's absolutely a technology play, absolutely a process play. But I think the biggest challenge is people have got to just start thinking differently across the business. They've got to anticipate that the world has changed, and they need to make decisions quicker, faster, not just and real decisions. Why do you need to wait till you see a perfect sample before you buy anything? Why do you need to even see what the color is going to look like before you buy anything? You should trust your supply chain to be able to execute on what they promised to execute on. And that, to me, is the big. We can add 3D, we can add three-dimensional items into that. You can PLM systems, all the tracking in the world, complete transparency and visibility. But if the team doesn't want to do it, or doesn't want to change the way that they've been doing it, you could have a very expensive tool with no benefit to the business. And so, to me, the fundamental. Chirag and I have known each other a long time. I learned the hard way. You've got to get your process right first and get it ticked and tied before you add technology into the mix. And it's not just a simple answer to say, let's just go get the best 3D system out there, or the best PLM system out there. You've got to make sure that you're ready for it, and when it comes in, and that it goes smoothly. Otherwise, all you end up doing is having an expensive tool with a process that doesn't work.
Yeah, I'll certainly endorse what you say, Ronnie. I think that you have to get the processes right. You have to get the merchandising cycle needs to be rethought, basically. How you plan, the approach you use from concept all the way through to delivery. The people involved, the way they collaborate, the way you draw your suppliers and into the network, all of that needs to be rethought. Some people are way ahead. I think you mentioned earlier, Ronnie, that the pure play guys are probably the leaders in this, because they weren't bound by old traditions and habits. They really started afresh and were able to think this from ground up. And that's possibly why you see some of the older traditional retailers struggling in this day and age. But,
those pure play guys are listening to their customers. They're using data and algorithms to tell them what to buy and when to buy it. They're not using gut feel. Now, I'm not saying I've worked with the best merchants in the world, and a really good merchant is worth a lot of money and can do things, but these guys are still making money without having good merchants. So something's telling them how to do that, right? And so, to me, it's about listening to their customer and understanding the data and translating that data via whatever technology they have into reordering or chasing new ideas. It's all about that.
Yeah, and I think that the next step to me would be, and I'll give Chirag and Bamboo Rose a big plug here, is to start thinking about introducing a digitized platform which connects all the various players in the supply chain. And Chirag, I'm sure you can, as a segue to you can talk.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Completely unplanned, but nice segue. I was actually going to comment, on Peter's question. Is you've got to establish a multi-enterprise network of trusted partners. So the key word here is, the network of community members, vendors, component suppliers, mills, logistics service providers. But to Ronnie's point, it's the process. Why are you not letting your vendors who've known you for such a long time do samples evaluation and help approve versus bringing it back home and going through 4 rounds of samples? All those processes have to be reevaluated. And then technology only becomes an enabler. Technology in some cases may do, but at least in this case can only enable the process. The trust in digital information can then drive the value. Process comes first, and where we think we add a lot of value once we become the enabler as a multi-enterprise product and supply chain platform, is we then help you synchronize in real time these millions of decisions and activities and data that's flowing across this entire enterprise. But process comes first.
Thank you. Wow. So my next question would be, over the last decade or so, we have seen dramatic emergence of omnichannel retailing, and now we see the emergence of new channels such as pop-up stores, marketplaces, social commerce, etc. So how does the supply chain need to be adjusted or reconfigured to optimize inventory deposition to serve all these channels?
Richard, you probably have the most expertise on that, I'm guessing.
I guess I can start there. You know, in the good old days, let's call it the bad old days, the easiest decision, the only real decision we had to make was, you know, how much do I ship to the East Coast and how much do I ship to my West Coast DC? Now you have, fulfillment centers, a growing business in online retail, which used to be, 1-2%. Now it's 30, 40, and even more than that percent of my entire business. How many different fulfillment centers do I have? How do I share inventory between my different marketplaces? How do I package my product for the various channels? Or can I standardize the packaging in some way so as to minimize the obstacles to inventory sharing? Inventory sharing, that's a whole different topic, which would command another webinar similar to this. But inventory sharing is, I think, going to be the holy grail for inventory management in the next decade. And that's something that I think supply chain officers need to think about going forward.
I remember listening to an old boss of mine who said the two rules of retail. You never want to run out of cash and you never want to have too much inventory, right? They're the two rules. And I couldn't agree more. I think the single most important thing right now for all of this, and what COVID has told us, is that people aren't going to, I think the online direct to consumer business is going to continue to grow. You know, it's definitely going to be at a minimum a third of a traditional retailer's volume, and maybe more, maybe 50, 60%. And what that means is these customers, you got to get to the product to the customer. Nobody wants to pay for shipping, right? So you got to get it to the customer as inexpensively as you can, but you can't take 2 weeks to get it there, right? So, so where you have that inventory is really, really important. And you're right, the historical West Coast, East Coast, you know, we're piloting hub stores right now where we have certain small stores around the country with a little bit bigger than the regular store. We put stuff there. I tell you, that's, if you have somebody who can push a button and say, this is exactly where you want to put every SKU in the country, that person would be a gazillionaire right now.
Yeah, I mean, just to add a thought on that as well, is absolutely agree. I think the traditional West East Coast, even a few years ago, having an dedicated e-commerce distribution center is shifting. It is your hub stores or having smaller distribution centers that are closer to that, that consumer is becoming important. From some statistics I've also read is that it is 50% cheaper to fulfill, an online order from a consumer from your hub store potentially than it is from an e-commerce distribution center. So the whole network is becoming a spider web, and the closest to that endpoint, is where the supply chain and the last mile is getting won. And I think you're seeing some leaders that are doing it very well at cost, if not, doing it at a cheaper, indirect cost than before. But it's a really interesting space to see how that's evolving.
Thank you. So my last question would be, how do you think ESG will impact supply chain processes, and how can retailers be proactive in meeting these new demands?
So I'll start on this one. To me, this is a really important element of the future, and probably actually of the past, but it just has been ignored or hasn't been essential. And I think that going forward, not only just the way politically the world is moving, climate. I'm in Scotland right now. There's a climate conference in Glasgow next week where the whole world is coming. Everything is coming to the fore, and everybody is listening. And as a father of two daughters in their 20s, they're very, very, very focused on doing the right thing from an environmental sustainability and governance perspective. So they get it. And people of my age are now jumping on this. I mean, I've been on this for about 10 years, but it's never been essential because there's never been an ROI. Everybody talks about an ROI for this stuff. There is no ROI for it. It's the right thing to do. And eventually there will be an ROI because nobody will buy your products if you don't have this in place. And so, you know, to me, it's about getting the message out there and working together and throughout the whole supply chain to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the future and having plans in place. And when you have an option, you take the right option, not the wrong option. It's not just about the lowest cost. It's about the lowest cost at the right, doing it the right way. That's my perspective.
And I think just to add to that, Ronnie, absolutely, it is becoming one of the most important boardroom topic in many organizations. Is not only the expectation from a consumer, but even as an organization retailer, you are setting some really good goals that you want to move towards in terms of ESG. But also Wall Street is measuring this. Your valuation as a company or even financial institutions are going to base it on how forward thinking are you and how much are you putting in practice a lot of this ESG policies. And it's across the entire supply chain. It's your suppliers, are they ethically, set up? Are they green? Is it traceability? It's all your component suppliers following that entire cycle. And it's all the stages of product development. Are you following all those targets that you've put in place? So it is highly, highly critical that.
And this is where technology helps a lot, because you need to have complete transparency. You need to have attributes that you can have that are tagged within each of your products to be able to, because I think it's only a matter of time before every consumer can go into any store and with their phone, click on something. It will tell you exactly where, not only which country the garment was made in, but where the fabric came from, what dye stuffs are in there, where the yarn came from, where the fiber came from, where the cotton field was it grown in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because the world is moving in this direction and everybody kind of wants to, food kind of started this way as well. And everybody having that, which makes sense because you're putting it inside your body, but apparel and accessories and footwear are absolutely going to go in this direction. And so that traceability and complete transparency to where things are is also going to be a differentiator, because then somebody will go in and say, oh yeah, this is organic cotton and it says so here and here's where it came from. So there are going to be people out there looking for those attributes to buy. So it's a boardroom issue, it's a consumer issue, and it's a moral issue.
Yeah, I mean, today's consumer is very different to the way they were 20 years ago. You think that the average person only gets to vote once every 4 years for a political decision. Well, they get to vote every day when they purchase something. And I think increasingly people are seeing their purchase decisions as a vote on political issues, on social issues, and on climate issues. And that's going to become more prevalent in their behavior going forward. So being able to respond and being able to exploit that capability, that thing, is going to be a strategic differentiator going forward.
Wow, Richard, that is an excellent way to end our session today. So thank you so much. I want to thank all our panelists, Richard, Ronnie, Chirag, and of course my colleague Peter. And I want to thank FIT for collaborating with the Robin Report on such an important and relevant topic. But lastly, I also want to thank our audience for tuning in to the Robin Report and Fashion Institute of Technology Thought Leadership Forum. So thank you.